official welcome since I've turned on the recording. My name is Dean Walker, and I'm very pleased to just be a production assistant, if you will, for this ongoing focused learning series, a chance to be a reading group, focused reading group, with the text of David Loy's ECODHARMA. And the person who's leading us on this journey is Tim Rempel. And so I'm going to turn this over to him in just a moment. But for anyone who's watching this recording, I'm the person that you would want to contact if you're having any trouble with any portion of the course, any difficult, reaching the live events or recordings or any other questions you might have. And you can reach me at the email that you've had in any of the emails that have come out, but it is safecircle@gmail.com, where you can reach me at any time for any reason. And so, with no further ado, Tim, the floor is yours, and off we go.
Indeed. Everybody welcome. I think seems like it's the 6 of us tonight. I was going to suggest maybe waiting a minute, but it seems like we're pretty close to quorum, as it were. So, like we do each of these sessions, let me find the tool to bring my singing bowl with. And if we could, we'd just sit for 5 minutes, and then we'll launch into things. Into chapter 2 is the topic of the night. Is the eco crisis also a Buddhist crisis? Which gets into some Buddhist ideas and some things that we'll talk about that I think, even if you're not formally a Buddhist, are useful to kind of consider. So with that, let's sit. Maybe one thing we can do to kind of start this evening is, after sitting, just talk a little bit for a few minutes here. If anybody has anything to share about, experiences with practicing sitting meditation and, related sorts of things, the last couple weeks. Anybody has any comments or questions, especially? They're going to be good to check and see.
I think I have a question. I'm willing to wager that I am not doing my sitting in a very efficient or perhaps good way. I've really been kind of tying it into my reading of the material. And so sometimes I find myself kind of pondering passages that I've been reading in a sitting. So I have a feeling I'm kind of bringing noise to the stillness. But in any case, there was, this might be a question for when we're talking about the text and we're really kind of diving deep in that way. I guess what I would say about the sitting part is that when I have this kind of heavier question that I'll bring, I guess, later, it's it's just fascinating to watch my mind kind of do its calisthenics around a difficult thing to kind of make sense of. So I guess what I'm sharing here is just some of those sessions of sitting where I've been noisy thinking about stuff, this material. Yeah, I think I would just like your feedback about that, because it just seems like I'm kind of making it difficult for myself by combining the two. I don't think I'm making it easy for myself to particularly do either thing very well, the sitting or the pondering of the material. So that's what I would say.
Yeah. No, that's a really good question, Dean. And it's, and I don't know, anybody else jump in, because, some of the folks here have extensive experience, certainly as much as I do, with, various flavors of meditation. And I guess that's one kind of cornerstone piece, is just to sort of note that it does come in a lot of different flavors. Because it's under the general heading of contemplation. I really liked the thing you said about you seeing how your mind is working. That's absolutely foundational. Because in a way, the details of the particular practice, at least to a certain extent, I think a pretty good extent, matter less. It's kind of good to pick one and stick with it, kind of thing, you know what I mean? But that said, sort of whatever works for you works. Because classic sitting meditation is not, and this is something I want to get into sometime, maybe not tonight, but Patricia Fay and some of the folks that practice insight, maybe we can kind of have a group discussion sometime of, if you go look at insight meditation, what's kind of unique about that. And I think of that as, it sounds funny to say, but it's about insight, you know what I'm saying? So it's not necessarily just about calm abiding, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So yeah, if you're inclined to just sit and let the mind settle, that can be useful. The other thing that can be useful, like in a little bit longer session, is sit and let the mind settle up front, and then use that stillness to like bring up something and look at what happens. And too, I think it's fun, it's like in that kind of context too, to pull in like some of Ian Gilchrist's idea and kind of notice that there are two halves, and there's the dynamics of what goes on in the mind is very interesting. I guess I'll just summarize it that way. You know what I mean? And that's the whole thing about insights into, or sometimes, insights into things you realize you think and you kind of by default believe, or they're a bias of some sort, and you look at them a little bit and you go, I'm not really sure I believe that. It's kind of at the autopilot level. And that's one of the, in the text, kind of to segue into that, one of the things that, in the David Foster Wallace piece of this chapter, he brings up a little bit about the autopilot. And I thought that was some good stuff. This is I think it's a pretty interesting chapter. I mean, Lloyd hits some interesting bases across the thing. And hey, Dean, if you have that slide, could you put that up for just a sec? Because I wanted to, the one thing about this chapter, I wanted to kind of just level set for folks a little bit, and we can mail this thing out. The background on it is some of this, a little bit further into this chapter gets into talking about different schools within Zen, and, differences between Rinzai and Soto and some of that kind of stuff. And, that's both kind of fairly Zen specific. Certainly useful discussion, but it is just Zen specific. And depending on kind of where folks come into this, the Buddhist tradition's big enough that where there's enough traditions within it between insight and Zen and Tibetan that might be useful to kind of, what I did was put together a one-page chart of kind of the three major Buddhist traditions. And it's important to understand those three, and there's kind of a historical origin for all three of them, because all of it came originally from India, but through different paths. And some of the contemporary insight stuff in the United States is real interesting because it's a consequence of the Vietnam War. That I know a number of teachers who were in the military in Vietnam, and that's where they ran into Buddhism in Southeast Asia, in particular Vietnam, and that whole school of Buddhism as well. That's the other piece about it that like from the point of view of the Tibetan perspective, there's three layers to it. There's what you could think of as the Theravada layer, which is a whole set of practices, and it's all based on what's called the Pali Canon. It's the words of the Buddha. And if you're a scholar, one of the interesting things about that, thank you, yes, perfect, is that the historic Buddha said what he said, and it's a closed system in that sense. It's not extended. Whereas in the Mahayana and the Vajrayana, it's partially based on what the Buddha said, less so in the Vajrayana. And then there's layers and layers and layers of commentary. So in an academic sense, it's an open system. If you were inclined, you could go write a commentary on, some text. And if you have something cool to say, the floor is yours. What I did was I kind of in this chart highlighted, the orientation is, it shifts from kind of individual awareness or awakening or enlightenment, pick a word, and in the chapter they talk about that a little bit, to more of a very definitely, I'm doing it for the benefit of all kind of orientation. And there's a major shift in there. There's a whole literature that's kind of unique to the Mahayana Zen is mostly Mahayana. I kind of categorize it that way. There are a couple schools that are actually Vajrayana, which is even harder to kind of explain what it is. I mean, that's why I jokingly put it down as playing with lightning. Because in the different practices, the more advanced practices get into visualizations and generation of visualizations and what's called the completion stage, which is kind of, to put it simply, once you visualize some practice, you become that entity. And then you sit there in that state, and there's more, and it's liturgical. You know, there's a whole practice and lots of words, but also practices and bell ringing and all kinds of crazy stuff. Put down a few here. Yeah, some of the major literature too, and some of that is mentioned in the book. Nagarjuna, or Nagarjuna, if I could say it correctly, was one of the major people in the Mahayana world. And it says heat. I need to fix the typo. That should be heart. And that's mentioned in here. So I thought, and I'll fix the typo and ask Dean to kindly send out a copy of this just for everybody's reference. So you kind of, have a sense of it. Loy is very definitely a Zen person. Is the world or the tradition he's from. So just kind of for reference. I think I just, like I said, just kind of wanted to mention all that. Maybe diving into the book, was there stuff in this chapter that people found surprising or challenging? I was curious about that.
Before we dive into this chapter, if I could, and please really just set me straight, if you'd rather stay with this chapter, what I wanted to bring up was what I was talking about when I first shared about the sitting and so on. And it's, I went back and was just looking through some of the first reading assignment, and man, I have some questions from there, and so if that's okay, if we could just spend a minute or two on some from before we go to where you're talking about. So I'm digging up my digitized version of the book to ask the question, and yeah, here we go. It's I'm sorry, I don't know if it directly correlates page numbers in the digitized version to the regular book, but it can't be too far off. And it says that it's page 16. So back in the foreword or the introduction, and it goes something like this. There's two questions that I have. The first thing is something about the soul, and how you've made mention of that in some of your our conversations, Tim, yours and mine. And then there's also some kind of scriptural sounding things that I don't quite know how to hold it. So let me just read you these two passages, one about soul, one of, yeah. So the Buddhist denial of a soul or a self, anatta, does not allow for that kind of immortality. Sorry, it's speaking to something from before. Instead, you and I cannot die insofar as we were never born. As the Diamond Sutra states, when countless beings have been led to nirvana, actually no beings at all have been led to nirvana. Dogen, the great 13th century Japanese Zen teacher, expresses this paradox best. He says, just understand that birth and death itself is itself nirvana. There's nothing such as birth and death to be avoided. There's nothing such as nirvana to be sought. Only when you realize this are you free from birth and death. And there's one last piece here. Although such teachings traditionally focused on our individual situation, they have important, they have important implications for how we collectively relate to the ecological crisis. It is not only that you and I are unborn, for everything is unborn, including every species that has ever evolved and all the ecosystems of the biosphere. From this perspective, nothing is lost when species, including ourselves, become extinct, and nothing is gained if our species survives and thrives. So I, just to be really honest and kind of embarrassed, I guess I'm supposed to have a better way of holding this. It has me kind of wonder, could this just looks like it's begging for spiritual bypass? Like it's a way of just saying, extinction doesn't matter because of this way of framing it. And so if you could just suggest a direction for me. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time if this is not something important to other people, but it was important enough for me that I wanted to bring it up.
Oh yeah, no, I appreciate that, Dean. Yeah, and I was trying to correlate where that is, but rather than get hung up on the book, let me just yeah, I think there's like a couple of levels of stuff going on. One of them is, I guess the cornerstone of it is, oh, thanks, yeah. Ecological crisis. Yeah, I mean, the thing is that you have to kind of understand the context, and admittedly, is how to explain all this stuff to folks, is like the Heart Sutra, there's no old age and death and no end to old age and death. It's framed in opposites that way. And so at another place in the book, one of the big ones is emptiness is nothing other than form, and form is nothing other than emptiness. It's deliberately a contradiction, that bit of it, that's designed to essentially allow you to see through relative reality. In chapter 2, at one point, Loy mentions that Ram Dass talks about it as kind of relatively real. And it is relatively real because everything looks relatively real and we all seem pretty relatively real. And that's one side. The other side is the whole idea of Sunyata, or emptiness, or that kind of thing. And so there's a two-level deal going on there, is essentially the piece of that. And so, yeah, if you took it, there's that piece, and let me kind of on a separate topic and then relate them. The second piece is, it's like at another place, David talks about how it's either the kind of spiritual bypass, in a sense, of transcend the world. What we're trying to do is go be in some pure land somehow, somewhere, sometime, something or another. Right. Or he does it, the dualism that he's pointing at is that's one thing, that you're trying to escape the world, and the other side of the dual is you're trying to fit into the world. And he points out that really there's a middle way through this that's essentially just being in the world now. And that's where there's two ideas kind of in my head at least relate, that yeah, there's the kind of what's referred to as the absolute nature of things. In Majjhimaka, in that slide we just had up, I had a line in there about that because that's the cornerstone philosophy of Mahayana Buddhism, which is the truth of the two truths, as it's called, the truth of the relative and the simultaneous truth of the absolute, and the fact that it's both at once, all the time, everywhere, is the nature of the deal.
Is that more or less the birthplace of the infamous koan?
Yeah, kind of. That philosophy is actually really old. It's back to the Indian roots of stuff, whereas koan stuff is really quite specific to Zen. But they are similar in that the Zen stuff is Mahayana, and what they're trying to get you to do is break through and sort of see, have that Kinsho moment of seeing the actual nature of things, that it's like, yeah, it's all here and it all looks like it functioned and it's all constantly changing and it's all interdependently originated, arisen. And there's not a damn thing here that's solid. Me, nothing. Whole clusters of galaxies, not a damn thing. And that's where it's wild. In a sense, the ultimate point of all that is to encourage you to let go, because that's what the koan thing is in a way. It's like the one I sent out in the email this week about, two hands when they clap make a clap. What's the sound of one hand? And you can say nothing and you can play with that. And, but wait a minute, if you say nothing and I move the hand fast enough, it's going to make some noise. So, yeah, that's where some of the stuff in this chapter is kind of a little bit challenging that way. I think that's where I was curious, people's reaction to it, that where it ends up going is kind of interesting. And especially particular the whole kind of latter part of the chapter about the whole analogy, the Chogyam Trungpa, the famous Buddhist Tibetan teacher from Boulder, who was there for years, started in Naropa University, a bunch of stuff. The thing about, enlightenment or waking up or transformation is like falling out of an airplane. The bad news is there is no parachute. The good news is there is no ground. And the corollary, of course, of that is what you do is you just keep falling. It's an ongoing process. And that's where it's like letting go isn't a one-time thing. It's engaging in that process and getting more and more comfortable with being less and less grounded, in the sense that if you want to, the fancy term nowadays that's used commonly is reify, to make it solid. But that's exactly the point, in a way. And it's the point in Buddhism about letting it go, is letting go of your reifications, if you will. This keeps me safe. Well, maybe, but it's going to go away, so you're going to be safe then. If I can let go of the safety, if I can let go of it and just sort of let things happen more, I have to, if nothing more, I have to exert less effort trying to solidify everything and keep it solid. Because the whole point is the underlying nature is everything's dynamic. And if you try and solidify stuff, you're going to be at it for essentially your entire life, I don't know. Does that help at all?
It does. I really appreciate it. And I don't want to take any more time, and I appreciate you've already started to bridge us toward this chapter. And I wanted to be sure other people got a chance to speak whatever they're seeing. Well, the last thing I heard you say, the words that come to mind are that things like the paradox or like the koan and like what I was wrestling with in the pieces that I read there, it seems like that wrestling, that working it inside my own mind and my own experience, that kind of head exploding contrasts or paradoxes, it seems like those are the kind of things that are sort of the working out and the building the muscle to be able to really let go at the next level and the next level. If I'm wrestling with that, if I'm really working them and letting them work me, it seems like that'll build a capacity and build a strength for me to again let go at the level of, oh, I don't have a parachute. Oh, there's no ground, and each of those is a whole different thing if I've already been really working that kind of contrast, that kind of paradox at some level is what I'm hearing. I don't know.
I think for me, in this chapter where I got hung up is towards the end of the chapter. I get, is it Sunyata, emptiness? I have an understanding of that. But when it shifted to the discussion of the unborn, totally lost me.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It's like, because I don't know that I've ever heard that before. So there's that. And there's also, my understanding is that this book Loy is going to get us to the place of activism, or how one can step into what is going on and be of service. I mean, that's my assumption. I may be wrong. So that the questions of Dean's questions, nothingness, or it doesn't, we're not here, the animals aren't here, there's this nothingness. I guess I wonder what that's for. Is it for the learning how to let go? Is it for being able to
I think
let go of attachment?
Well, yeah, certainly at one level it is, to let go of attachment, especially in, first and foremost, my own ego. To me thinking I'm real and especially separate. That's the really big one to me, is that I'm separate from the rest of y'all. And David mentions it in the book, that I have somehow, my fate is unique to me and completely decoupled from everything else that happens in the universe. And it couldn't be any more the opposite of that if it tried. You know what I'm saying? It really couldn't. There's the unborn stuff is interesting because it's the idea of it. I think of it as not created, and this is where, admittedly, this stuff kind of does get a little bit philosophical and subtle, and sometimes real subtle, to be honest. Because it's like, what it's really about is, it's like that the Sunyata, the emptiness, but empty, it's not empty. I mean, that's one thing he talks about in there. It's potential. That's where, instead of emptiness, you could call it the quantum vacuum. And especially for some people, it'd be just spot on. That's exactly the thing. It's that which it isn't a form itself. It's not a thing. It's that out of which everything arises. It's the sum of all potential, that expresses across time and space and all that. And that's the thing that it's interesting you guys hit on this, because it's like, the thing about, the species aren't there and it doesn't matter either way, is more of an absolute statement. But in the relative, it does matter, and everything is interdependently originated. So if we lose one species, the whole thing potentially starts unraveling in some way we may not even understand, because everything is in the relative, everything is interdependently originated. That's how it works. So you do have to be kind of careful with it, because you're right, you can end up in a bypass kind of thing, or nihilism or nihilism, or how you pronounce that exactly. That essentially you say it doesn't matter is the thing. And from a relative perspective, it certainly does matter. And in the absolute, you can say nothing matters, but I think equally, you could immediately flip that on its head and say everything matters. And I'd rather stick with that one personally, because that way it keeps you out of the kind of the gutter of, thinking that stuff doesn't matter. The thing about it is, if everything matters, though, then it's like my ego doesn't get to pick and choose what matters more and what matters more to me and what matters more today, and all that. It's like, so yeah. And the unborn is kind of that, because it's the whole idea. It's related to that in the sense that one way to put it is everybody intrinsically has Buddha nature. And it's uncreated, it's unfabricated. You don't choose it in an ego sense. You can't undo it. And that's the unborn part, is that emptiness is the unborn piece. But admittedly, that gets kind of subtle. But you're right, Gavin. Yeah, where David's going with this, and that's actually where in this chapter is sort of a preview of the selfless engagement piece. That if you can, the whole point in a way is, working on the Buddhist path, coming, like Dean was saying, to see this more and more clearly, kind of incrementally. In that sense, getting more and more reconnected with yourself and your actual nature, instead of what we all got programmed with by the business as usual crud. That's where I love the airplane analogy, because it's like Loy says, in the business as usual framework of being inside the airplane, being in the airplane looks like the same thing to do, but it's all a myth. And a myth that's self-destructing. It's the myth that's eating the world and destroying itself and the world in the process. That's a heck of a thing to, but that was one thing I liked about him including the David Foster Wallace stuff in here, because it really is that whole thing about you're always worshiping something. That you're on the default settings unless you realize you're on the default settings and go do something about it. And that's kind of the levels of awareness of the climate emergency is kind of that a similar kind of thing in a way. If you just go along with the don't have a clue level that everybody's at in the business as usual thing, you just keep heading down that path and you don't have to worry, what I'm saying, because it so consumes your attention, you don't think about anything else, kind of literally. But yeah, where he's going with this is the whole idea is, if you can, the more selfless you can become, the more engaged you can be. It's really kind of the punchline of the thing.
It frees up oceans of energy when we're not trying to survive anymore.
Well said. Yeah, because Patricia Faye, I really do think that's the thing. If you kind of look at the reification and how you have to keep investing energy in this. I mean, it's really wild. You're in the business as usual thing, but there's energy expenditure in this weird kind of way to sort of stay inside the bubble, and I don't want to think about stuff.
In New Thought, I'm an ordained New Thought minister. I don't know if you guys know about New Thought, Church of Religious Science, Unity, all of that. But we used to say, fake it till you make it. And I guess if the unmanifested world is where the manifested world comes from, and we're all grounded and conditioned in the manifested world, we're going to be practicing, we're going to be living that we're not going to have any problem doing that part. That's what we do automatically with all of our conditioning, right? So to pretend, to fake, to try to practice that we don't exist, I don't think we can do enough of that ever, right?
Yeah.
I mean, for me, that's the challenge, that to try to remember that I wasn't born and I don't die. Give me a break, you know, that takes some work.
Tim, I really like what you said, Patricia Fay. What I find for myself is that, and this is such a pervasive issue that comes up in Buddhist circles, is it seems like we struggle so much with this, understandably so, I do. But it does feel like when I'm I'm mostly tapped into the relative world. And as an activist, I'm mostly tapped into the relative world, and I want to make it a better world, and I want to end the craziness, right? And I get crazy about it as well. But when I can tap into that part, that absolute, that Sunyata, and I like the notion of describing it as the unlimited potential, the possibilities. That makes sense. It seems to me that what happens when I tap into it is that I activate a different part of my brain. It's not my normal everyday brain. There's something else that gets activated that's enabling me to tap into that emptiness. But when I do, it feels very freeing, and it feels very, it helps the part of me that gets over attached to the activism, and it creates a balance, and then if I can tap into it more, I can go back and forth a little bit more, and gain a bigger perspective, and not get over attached, even to the most noble vision, which I can get attached to that sort of stuff. Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to say is that a lot of it for me is about learning how to live with the paradox of it all.
Yeah, I was gonna, go ahead.
Yeah, no, this was a good chapter. I'm done. Go ahead, Patricia.
I was in a conversation this morning on Humanity Rising with the cosmologist Carl Kalaman. Do you guys know who Carl Kalaman is? He's really an expert in the Mayan calendar, but he was talking about exactly what you're saying, Rebecca. He was saying how that when we are acting from our rational brain, that is actually being downloaded through our physical brain from the cosmos, or what you would call the unlimited potential. So when we're not in a frenzy doing our activism, when we're, doing it from a rational place of no attachment to outcome and all those things you mentioned, then that is, we are being downloaded from the unlimited potential.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I love. Right at the end of the chapter, he talks about, the responding appropriately piece. That it's the activism. One way I think of it, and kind of where David's going in the kind of the sweep of the overall book, is that it's kind of like what you were saying, Rebecca. You can get attached to your vision of it, and you can get attached to what you're doing, and you can get sort of hopeful, maybe really hopeful about a particular outcome of what you're doing. And then if that doesn't materialize, you get all bummed and depressed. And you know how it is, the life of an activist can be tough. I mean, it can really, really be tough. And we've hit on one of the kind of the major themes, I think, of the whole book, is that whole idea of being involved, being engaged, and letting go of the outcome. And the other piece of that is really what that allows you to do is get closer to responding appropriately. Because in a sense, instead of having all my stuff about how I want this, protest assembly to go, or, whatever it is, the XR group we're working to try and form, or whatever kind of thing it is. If letting go of my biases about that and just be willing to kind of respond appropriately in the moment and be there in the moment to respond appropriately to it.
So I don't know where else you might want to be going, Tim, this evening, but I've heard you mention your fondness of David Loy's inclusion of David Foster Wallace's piece in this chapter. And if nobody else has a particular focus they need to talk about, I'd love to hear more about what is it that lights you up about that connection.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Boy. I mean, there's a whole sort of, for me, kind of a whole deal about Foster Wallace. And I'm so glad that Loy included him in here, because he was an author of fiction stuff. I never read his books, fiction books. I'm not much of a fiction person myself. He was such a crazy writer that he could write a single paragraph that covered an entire page and was grammatically perfect. He taught English for a number of years. He was, somebody just incredibly aware. I've done a little bit of research of who he was and his life and stuff, and was somebody that certainly kind of operated a level of awareness of things that a little bit more than most people, which is part of what informed all of his literature. And he gave this crazy commencement address at Kenyon College that ended up being the book This Is Water. But it was such a commencement address, to a bunch of students, but it was so damned brilliant, I thought, in terms of being insightful and really calling a spade a spade. And, for example, talking about the thing that there is no such thing as not worshiping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. And an outstanding reason for choosing some sort of God or spiritual type thing to worship is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. He didn't pull punches. He was very, and I think it was just, to me, it's so fascinating that he did that commencement speech, and it is such a, it's so insightful. And like one of the things that, they're in a book form of the book on page 64, is the discussion from Wallace about default settings. And I think that's just so insightful, because that's the whole thing about business as usual. And realizing that in the same way that David Loy talks about each of us being a sociological, psychological construct that our parents create, and then we take over the creation, and that's what makes me think I'm me, is I got programmed up that way. That the default, that is what teaches you the default settings, and the business as usual world is what keeps you on the default settings and strongly encourages you to maintain the default settings. You don't want to be a dissident. You don't want to not fit in. You don't want to be too weird. You don't, that to me, I'm kind of rambling a little bit, and I'll stop. But that's the thing about Wallace, is he's so good at pointing right at that in a way that so few just, you know what I mean? And with the clarity of, because I like the written, if you listen to the audio, it's brilliant. He was a great speaker. if you just read the text, it's really remarkable too, because you see the construction of the language and the mastery of it. And it's just like, pardon my language here, but holy fuck, somebody who can write like that and uses that skill, you know, in that way to just, I'm sure the poor college kids had no idea what was coming, but you know, I don't know, and I love it that it's so, and it, as Loy mentioned, it's so damn dharmic if you know about the Buddha Dharma and the philosophy and all that sort of stuff. But Wallace wasn't necessarily a Buddhist, you know, just came up with what he came up with by just looking at what's in front of him. And that's why I like the word awake better than the word enlightenment, you know what I mean? Enlightenment's kind of stilted. It's really about being awake. And you know, the more awake you are, it can be tough. It can be tough. It was tough for him, that's for sure. But, and that's where it helps to have, I think, you know, practices like sitting meditation, you know, all sorts of other kind of practices, and some of the stuff you do in Deep Academy, Dean, you know, some of those practices, to have a set of practices that if there's anything that grounds you, that's what it is, you know, and it's actually the practice, you know, that's the grounding of this. And then if stuff comes up, you know, you can literally kind of take it onto the cushion and see what the hell goes on, you know, see what insight you have when you look at what's going on in your head and go, I don't know. Hopefully that at least helped about Wallace.
Yeah, thank you.
Tim, what do you, for you, what does he mean by responding appropriately?
Oh, I think of it, I think of it basically as that you're there with the situation in the circumstance and the people with as little personal agenda as you can have. You know, you're probably going to carry some, but you know what I'm saying, trying to turn that down with a very open heart and see what's in front of me, and kind of based on that, do what seems, you know, out of different choices, the best choice, the best way to respond. I mean, in a wild way, it's as simple as the old Covey stuff about the difference between reacting and responding. If you put that gap in between and think about, oh, how am I going to respond? Instead of just habitually always reacting, then you give the compassion and the wisdom the opportunity to, you know, use me, so to say, you know, kind of like Patricia was saying, you know, in a sense, something bigger is getting downloaded through you in a way, to put it in one language.
It's helpful to me, and this is a new practice for me, is to wonder about people, to wonder about things, to wonder about my beliefs and others' beliefs, and to not pretend that I know anybody, not even my family members, but to continue to be in that present moment awareness with them, where you just wonder, like, oh my God, Tim, it's you. My goodness, let me just see how you're going to be today. You know, that kind of surprise and awe and wonder at everything. To me, that is very helpful when it comes to responding appropriately. If I'm in wonder, I can trust that I'm going to respond well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, my teacher has a saying, let every moment be fresh when dealing with self and other. If you think about it, that pretty much covers every moment all the time.
Yeah.
And yeah,
I mean, and we don't have to have very much information to make up a story about another person. I can be driving down the road and just see their license plate. And if it tries to say anything, I've got the whole story of who that person is. You know, what they do, if they beat their wife, if they have kids, you know, whatever.
Kick the dog. Yep. Oh yeah. Yeah. And it's amazing once you kind of become aware of how much story we all carry around inside our heads about ourselves and various aspects of ourselves and our lives and the whole thing, and then how much story we make up on the fly, and it's just like, whoa.
Patricia Fay, I'm pretty sure that you and I come from the same lineage, whatever that is, whatever that lineage is. I share much of what you just described, like word for word.
Oh, good. Well, a lot of mine is Werner, and I've been listening to Werner a lot recently, so I'm not surprised. Today he was talking, I heard him talk about, and I think it was Heidegger that talked about our tranquilized obviousness and doing violence to that so that we can actually be in wonder. That caught my attention because I've been practicing wonder. And I love that phrase though, tranquilized obviousness.
Yeah.
Who's Warner?
Werner Erhard started the
Oh.
EST training in 1972.
Yeah.
I did it in 78, worked on staff for 10 years, raised money for the organization for another 10, did all the youth at risk programs.
We may have met at Youth at Risk. That's where I worked most of the time. After leaving the 6th day, I worked at Youth at Risk for decades.
Was that through the Breakthrough Foundation?
Uh-huh.
That's where I was on staff.
Yeah,
I was
cool.
the sponsor relations manager at the Breakthrough Foundation from 81 to 85.
I can't imagine we didn't at least bump into each other a little bit.
I guess I'm just being stingy, but I would love to hear from Chris because of all the stuff that's going on in Colorado right now and how her practice may be useful in that or not, or if you're even able to sit, or I know for myself, I've been trying to bring Tong Lin into my practice, but I don't know if you want to say anything or not, but I would love it if you did.
Oh, thanks. Well, I guess one thing was that I didn't want to listen to the news, and so I haven't. I was walking down the street with my boyfriend, and one of the neighbors in the little village that he lives in, it's right outside of Boulder, told us what had happened. And at that point, they said 3 people, and then the newspaper came the next morning, and there were 10 people, and it was just, it just feels like a blow. And for me, it's like right away I cried briefly, and I just felt this grief. And I woke up in the middle of the night, and I just felt that grief. And I didn't even really want to read the newspaper. It was enough to know. I knew what that suffering is. And I've been allowing that grief to, as we went snowshoeing, and every day we were snowshoeing, and just being out in the forest, and I let that soak in. It's like it feels a little bit like two things, but it's not. And I don't know if I'm being clear. It's like feeling the spaciousness, and then feeling the depth of because I felt I felt grief and sadness, but I felt the almost like aloneness, like that. And I guess to feel what I mean by the forest is that is absolutely beautiful and perfect, you know? And so to feel these two things together, there's a tension there, and there's a way that death is part of life, you know, is as well. I don't know. So that was how I was with it.
Thank you. Thank you. It truly is the dark night of the soul for the human race. I believe that we're going through that darkness of the tomb, but coming into the darkness of the womb, like Valerie Carr likes to say. You know, that we really are moving into a new paradigm, but it may even be darker than this before we see the light.
You know what this brings up for me is, you know, and reading the book here is the, you know, keep. It's almost like things becoming so bad that you, in a way, I don't know, it's hard for me to even go about. I know David's going into what we should be doing, you know, like let's do something. And in a way, I don't know how to say this. It's like, it's so, what's the word? We have to be right here. It's so, there's so much tension that it's just demanding just this, just to be with this. And I don't know for myself what that is, you know, what that will come about. And I think, you know, what Tim, what you were saying about how do you forget? All I can know is just to be with what is right now. And that's very personal, you know, I'm feeling the grief. So I don't know this thing about doing something to save the world. That's so beyond what I can. I do my little things, but that's just where I'm at right now. That's where I'm
And
at.
yet, Chris, if we're one with all there is, every time we're in that present moment awareness, we're serving the whole. Because if the whole could, if every single being could be in present moment awareness, that's the resiliency, that's the adaptation, that's the key, that's the thing that's going to allow us to go through this, you know, is what I see. And so when I'm practicing that, I know I'm being just as helpful as I can.
Yeah. I would say my practice is just knowing that I'm life itself. And the thing is, it's all about relationship. It's not about these, you know, if we're all one, it's not about these separate things or beings. It is, but it is also about so much about relationship. Are you in right relationship to everything? It's like, how can you do something, just something as that seems very innocent, like maybe buying a gallon of milk at the store. It's so screwed up, you know. No part of that is actually, hardly any of it's in right relationship. How we treat the cows or the, you know, the workers, or all of these things. And I don't know, that's what it feels like to me.
Like to go near the end of the chapter, he talks about, it's kind of, he doesn't use the word transformation per se, but it's implied by what he talks about of the three poisons, as they're known in the Buddhist world, of greed, ill will, and delusion or confusion. And those, they use the words transmuted, which is maybe stronger than transform, I don't know, you know, into more positive motivations of generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom. And that, at one level, I think that's kind of an interesting way to look at kind of business as usual is the greed and ill will, and, you know, and all of that, and trying to move more and more to, you know, being in a place of generosity and, you know, like it says in the book, loving kindness, or at least, you know, basically basic friendliness, and kind of holding that and seeing if I can be more that way day to day. I mean, that was the part I really like about some of what Loy has to say too about, you know, it's the thing of you can spend time on the cushion, and that's good. That's kind of like half of a two-stroke engine, but the other stroke is what you do when you're not on the cushion. And, you know, I have seen in you know, the years in the Buddhist community, sometimes there is the tendency to want to kind of pull your meditation blanket in around you, and you just want to sit on the cushion 12 hours a day because you feel better there, and you feel more grounded, and you feel more sane and all that, which is true. But, you know, that is, if you go too far that way, you know, that's kind of not the point of the whole thing either. So yeah, and that really is one of the recurring themes you'll see in the book, is that whole idea of, you know, deconstructing on the cushion and reconstructing in real life, and what you do in real life in activism and that kind of thing.
Valerie Carr calls it push and breathe, like having a baby, like transition time.
Oh,
Push
wow.
and breathe.
Damn.
Sweet labor, bloody, messy labor, but look what comes.
Yeah, and to add to that metaphor, the work of holotropic breath. Who's the guy?
Stan Groff.
Stan
He
Groff.
just turned 90.
Amazing. So he talks so beautifully about the notion of right before coming out into the world, there's these collective memories that people have had where they remember that they almost died. So we get that feeling that we almost are going to die during a birth, when we're coming out of the birth canal. So maybe that's the dark night of the soul that we're going through right now. The protracted and dark night of the soul, the long emergency.
That's what I think.
Yeah, another source of that kind of stuff is Martin Prechtel, The Smell of Rain on Dust, about grief and how you can only grieve what you love and all of that. And the chapter in his book is the best description I've ever seen anywhere. And I don't know some of the other literature, but that I've encountered so far, of classically in Buddhism, one of the sufferings is the suffering of birth. Old age, sickness, and death, you kind of get, you know, that's kind of obvious. But why suffering of birth? I mean, for a long time, I was kind of like, you know, didn't quite. And then I read that chapter in Martin's book, and it's exactly what you were talking about, Rebecca, and the whole thing of how you didn't have to breathe, you didn't have to eat, you were there with your mother's heartbeat all the time. And all of that one day dramatically changed. And then your eyes opened and there was light. And that was pretty scary too, because it'd been very dark before that.
Well, the 30 or 40 hours of labor, or how many we had with those kids, you know, that's the time when the birth trauma is occurring for the newborn. It's that passage down the birth canal, getting a shoulder caught, getting the cord wrapped around your neck, having to have an emergency cesarean, heart stop, you know, whatever all the things are that happen in that space of time. It's not like you go into labor and the kid's born. It's like you got hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of trauma.
Yeah, both of you. Yeah.
Yeah, but mostly for the newborn.
Oh yeah, yeah. And that's what I've heard, even if it's a, you know, part of Martin talks about it in his book, that even if it's a, you know, uneventful, pretty quick, you know, birth, just as the newborn, the shock of this is like probably the biggest shock other than death we'll have in our whole life.
That's why they're so related.
Mhm.
Birth and death. It's the
Mhm.
same thing.
Yeah, that would just blew my mind. You know, I thought that was so cool. I love this conversation because, yeah, a lot of people don't really kind of have that view of things. They don't see that much of reality. You know, I think it's really cool when you do kind of look at, you know, lots
Okay.
of aspects of what's going on here. Yeah, what's interesting to just dawned on me to mention, kind of to perhaps connect a couple dots. That in some of Dean's Deep Academy stuff, there's mention of the liquid state, and as I understand that term, it's like being in a it's essentially kind of in the airplane model. It's in the mode of the continuous free fall. If you're completely in the liquid state, and it's just, and how non-standard, certainly non-business as usual that is, you know, because you know how to, they want you real solidified and buying frequently. You know, keep shopping, whatever you do, keep shopping. Yeah, I found that the idea of the free fall and the liquid state, the parallel of in a way, I think that's really talking about the same thing.
Yeah, it sure is. That's my experience as well. You know, there's a mention a little while ago, I think it was maybe Chris, that was just saying, boy, we just got to be with it. We just got to be as present with each moment as we can be. And that's it seems like a potent, ubiquitous statement across the board for psychospiritual awareness in these times, and you know, at any time, but especially now. And yet you know, I've been wrestling with these existential level predicaments that we're in for a while now. I was particularly writing in the writing of the book that I did, called The Impossible Conversation. I just was wrestling with if what we're actually facing is a set of predicaments, which predicaments by their definition don't offer us solutions, then what do we do? You know, what do the wise people tell us about engaging? How do we be in action in the face of predicaments? And you know, I won't bore y'all with what my ruminations have been and the conclusions and the practices and so on, but bottom line was I just saw that what got us here is disconnection from all the primary sources of meaning and relationship in human life. And whether it's predicaments or not, the only thing I could see to do was to gather practices of reconnection. Whether we have a day left a decade left or centuries left.
Mhm.
And there was one other part of that that I guess is just practices, but it somehow shows up on a different level, is I've really taken on even more than I've had in my life, which is a lot, is desaturating myself from the business as usual paradigm, because it's just gotten so damn intense just in my old guy lifetime. You know, it's different than when I was born in the late 50s. It's just so very, very different, and it's super saturating. And so I just wanted to mention those, because I think the default mode of what it is to be, just to be present in the face of what's going on, I think the average person doesn't have access to even the most rudimentary elements of what someone like Chris or Tim or Patricia Fay or whoever's got a really substantial experience of a sitting practice and of psychospiritual practices and so on. The average person has no idea what it is to be present in the moment. So it's not a default option for them. They just don't know what they don't know. And I'm sorry, I don't have a punchline or a question out of this. Thank you for just listening as I was thinking out loud.
Thank
No, I
you.
think you're right, Dean. You know, and that's, again, Foster Wallace's stuff about the default setting and how that's unconscious is just, that's the point.
Mhm.
And that's really the whole point about waking up, is to become a little more conscious. And yeah, I mean, it blows my mind when I see people that they're so addicted to their cell phone, that they're literally have it pulled out and their face is one with it, and they're skiing or snowboarding down the mountain. They can't
What a
even stop
metaphor.
long enough when you're doing something like that. Now, you know, I know Dean's a water person, and the good thing about like being a surfer stuff is you have to leave the damn cell phone on the beach, because you know it's like you take it out of the water and it'll fry. But it's like, damn, guys.
Hmm.
I don't think it's a coincidence that in the mental health field, we're looking so intensely at emotional dysregulation, and to counter that, or to contribute to that, we have this notion called that we call distress tolerance. To really learn all kinds of wonderful capacities to help us deal with distress. And this is something that's being offered to folks who are extremely emotionally dysregulated. But that can be all of us today. But it's coming up for me, the notion of just be, it sounds good, but how do I just be with the absolute sheer trauma of our world? And so it's helpful. I'm a therapist, so I've been reading about emotion, about distress tolerance, and it's really helping me. And it's wonderful. There's so much information now out there about different wonderful ways to manage distress. So that's a more proactive way of dealing with it all, or that's a way of learning to just be.
I like to say right now it's like this. Right now it's like this.
Oh, that helps you. Yeah. This is the way, right now it's like this. Yeah.
If I can remember to say that, it alleviates me from having to be there anymore, it seems.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like,
I have a similar one, and it goes like this: I don't want to argue with reality.
Yeah, and that's what I think of sitting meditation, the just now, out breath. You follow the breath, but maybe a little more focus on the out. Like if you're doing the counting thing, you count out breaths. Because every time you let it go, every time you breathe out, you're kind of letting it go. I mean, you're literally letting it go. Your breath is, you know. And it's that ability to kind of, because I think of too, the emotional piece of that is sort of, the, you know, the sigh that's built into that almost, especially if it's something kind of distressful. I can quit holding my breath. I can quit holding the tension. I can quit holding this. I can breathe out. Maybe not perfect, but better. And Lord knows nowadays, I think we all need a lot of ability to do that because it's just, Lordy. No, that's fascinating, Rebecca. You're into that kind of stuff. Yeah, because I think of what happened in Boulder demonstrates, you know, extreme, obviously, extreme mental dysregulation in so many ways all at once. I mean, how could someone come to be in that state? You know what I'm saying? I'm left wondering. And I realize they don't go there in one gigantic leap. Step by day by step by day by step by day. But, you know, I'm sure there's a whole.
And they didn't go there alone.
Oh, no. That's the other part. It's always a system. None of us are. That's back to we're not separate at all. Yeah.
Well, it's growing up being saturated in an environment of a business as usual paradigm of that which is most incentivized is that which most successfully extracts from earth and from humans the maximum amount of profit with the least amount of cost to the entity doing the extraction. And that means we are headed toward a human caused sixth mass extinction, and we've normalized it now. We talk about that like we talk about what kind of candy bar we like. So it's actually the kind of tragedy that just happened in Boulder is a very important, a significant, successful metric of this culture. And this culture is very much not well.
Mm-hmm.
If I may, just one brief thing, Rebecca, your comments have been really great, and I appreciate it. And reminds me of a woman who's been instrumental in helping me develop a parenting, conscious parenting in these times program. And she provides online training for therapists, you know, continuing education. And she's offered up this year one of the few environmental awareness and eco-anxiety based training programs for therapists to work with their own issues and then, of course, their clients. And it's unbelievably inexpensive. It's like $30 for this great course. And she's getting almost no takers and getting therapists who find out about it and troll or throw out negative comments toward this provider of continuing education. You know, I've wondered for a while about the mental health industry around the world. It just still, there are a few things that are coming along and much better than they were 5 years ago, but God, it's terrifying how little support and little ability to truly speak truth to power or just speak truth from our mental health professionals. So perhaps some other time, Rebecca, I'd love to have a conversation with you if it's of interest, and perhaps even a podcast interview, because I think this is a desperately important conversation that happens all too rarely. So thank you for your comments. It's really made a difference for me to hear you.
Yeah, thank you, Dean. You know, the profession has been hijacked by the consciousness of separation as well. And most therapists still are. Ecotherapists less so.
Mhm.
So yeah, thank you, Dean.
Well, we're at the bottom of the hour, and I don't want to keep everybody too long this evening. But just a very heartfelt thank you to all of you. This was an amazing conversation. Yes.
Yeah.
Don't do this very often, and really, really, really appreciate everybody's input to this. It's just so incredibly rich.
Thank you, Dane, for sending out that email with the points that Tim said we were gonna, about what we needed to look at and stuff. That was helpful since I don't have the book.
All righty. Well, you're certainly welcome, and Tim and I will both, pair up like that and get the message out to you
Great.
basically every week with stuff in between.
Thank you.
Yes, and I will try and do that. Just speaking of real quick too, read through the chapter and see if there's stuff where occasionally, David uses terms and it's not in the index. He doesn't explain it. He doesn't unpack it. He just bam, there's the word. And if you don't, some of this stuff, you don't know what the devil is a Rinpoche.
Well, I did know that.
Yeah, it's you know what I mean. It's like, because I did notice it's one of those things. It's like it's in there and it's not unpacked and it's not in the index and it's like this goes. So yeah, we'll try and get that out.
And Bill, it's good to see your face. I know you had to
Yeah.
come in a little bit late tonight. Good to see you. Your audio's breaking up a lot, Bill.
I said I enjoyed the conversation tonight. I'm not a practicing Buddhist, so a lot of this is new to me, but I'm enjoying learning more. And so thank you all for that.
All right, are we out of here?
Bye, everyone. Stay well.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Well.